very much for attending this evening. Without further ado, let's start with agenda item 1, minutes. Minutes of the meeting, the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 20th of June are attached to your papers, and you're asked to confirm them as a correct record.
Agreed.
Easy? You okay with it? Yes, good. Thank you. Right, Kimberly, do we have apologies for absence?
We do. We have apologies from Councillor Gray and Councillor Lee. And we also have apologies from Dennis Smith, and Gillian Martin is substituted. And Councillor Hyman.
Councillor Hyman's kindly stepped into the
Yes.
breach. So, Gillian, Councillor Hyman, thank you very much for stepping in. Almost at full quota. Are there any declarations of interest to report?
No declarations of interest been submitted.
Does anyone have anything in relation to specific agenda items this evening?
May have a general interest as a tenant of the council, but not a specific.
Have we received any questions from members of the public?
You haven't, no.
Have we received any questions from members in general?
No, none submitted.
Excellent. In which case, I believe Nora can't be with us, so Andrew, are you going to present the
Thank you, Chair.
corporate performance review? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, so members, page 41, I believe, in your, I was going to say your bundle, I think that's a legal term, but you know what I mean. So obviously the communities section we covered under the Community Wellbeing ONS, so housing delivery. Just really to highlight one or two things for members. Quite a lot of this will come up when Louisa and Mike and Annalisa speak a bit later on, but I would like to highlight the progress that Site A Oxford Ridge is making. Because we have the drone facility now, we get the overview and see how the houses are going up and the quality of the build, and we'll be arranging a visit for ONS members to have a look during the autumn. So I think we're speaking to Yasmin about that, and I'm sure that members of the committee would find that useful. Also, just to mention as well that Louisa will shortly be presenting the development programme, but one thing we are looking at more and more now is to take units through Section 106 agreements from developers. We've started that with our scheme at Amlets Lane, which is highlighted here in Cranley, 5 units from Carla Homes, and we are talking to 1 or 2 other developers about acquiring units in the same way that a housing association does. We see this as quite an essential means of increasing our stock going forward. So it's something new for the council. First scheme under our belt and successful. There are others in the pipeline. We had a good all-member briefing. I can't remember when it was. I think it was probably July. I think it says so in the report. July the 17th. And a good number of members in the chamber. What I was personally thrilled about was the cross-party support for increasing appropriate and sustainable affordable housing in the borough. So that was good, and good to get that member interest, and that's certainly something we want to continue to do. Also, we're hosting a homelessness conference on October the 8th, where we and our partners that we work with across the borough to prevent homelessness and to provide accommodation for those in special housing need. That's occurring on the 8th of October. So I don't know if there's any questions. Also, just to highlight on page 43, looking at the number of affordable homes permitted, the very complicated bar graph there will show you the 2 schemes. The Town and Country Planning Association are hosting an event with us. Something that came out of the member briefing was that members were keen that planning committee should take a harder line on ensuring that developers delivered policy compliant schemes in terms of affordable housing. And so the Town and Country Planning Association are coming to work with us to see how we can improve and work more on ensuring that we do get that housing delivered through Section 106 agreements. So that's also scheduled for the first week in October. You'll notice under Service Plans Action Status, the yellow, the 14%, that is to do with the enforcement policy and new charging schedule under our private sector housing work. Simon Brisk will be with us at the next committee presenting a thumbnail sketch of that particular service and explaining how that's working, how government legislation is becoming basically through in dribs and drabs, which is why we haven't been able to finalise the new charging schedules by the time we would have hoped to have done. But certainly next ONS, Simon will be with us and presenting and be able to take questions. I think, Chairman, that's all I wanted to say at the moment on that.
Thank you very much. Can I open the floor to questions?
Sorry, just one question. Are we paying the same for these houses at Amulets Lane as the housing association would be? Or are we having to pay more?
No, we're not having to pay more.
Oh, right. Good.
No, we're not having to pay more, and actually we obviously it's always a bidding process.
Yeah.
So the developer will have a number of housing associations that he will go out to. This particular scheme at Amulets Lane, the housing association Hyde that had taken the bulk of the units didn't want 5.
Yeah.
And we've dipped our toe in this particular area because housing associations by and large do not want to take under 10 units. So they then start to hum and ha, wriggle out of it, offer us a commuted sum in lieu of affordable housing on site. We're saying actually we're interested in taking those smaller numbers of units. And so really that for us was a bonus and a fairly straightforward. There are those that we are looking at now where we will be going into competition with some of the big boys. Anecdotally, what we're hearing is that because our housing management is so good, because our work we do with sustaining tenancies and supporting our tenants is so good, and a lasting reputation will be important to a developer who wants to leave, believe it or not, some kind of a legacy, then we are being looked at favourably. So there's going to be more of this that we'll be sharing with you in the future, and it isn't ultimately entirely all about who makes the highest bid. They are looking at the quality of housing management. Of course, our housing management based in the heart of the borough. If you look at some of our larger housing association partners, then their management base is in, say, Winchester. Their tenants will not get many visits when they need them. So there's a number of things going on. As I say, this is a new area for us. Louise might touch on that in a few moments, but that's a long-winded answer to your question, Councillor James.
No, it's a good one, because it's an important one. Thank you.
Councillor Merritt?
Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry,
was that?
Councillor Merritt first.
In the minutes, we refer to KPIs H5, H7, H8, but the corporate performance report, I guess, has been updated since then, and we don't have those KPIs in the current version.
I think Annalisa might be able to answer that. Councillor Merritt being our policy performance or our service improvement manager.
Yeah, just to confirm that this is the first quarter of the new financial year, so the last committee agreed to amendments to the KPIs. So we're really focusing on what we're delivering. And I think some of the, trying to remember those numbers off the top of my head, I think some of those might have been around some of the homeless stats that didn't actually, the committee felt didn't actually help that much in assessing how we were doing it, delivering homelessness prevention. The bottom line is how many people do we have in temporary accommodation, and the answer is nothing.
Yes, Andrew, I remember last year, probably about this time last year, this committee was told when an officer was asked, what's the definition of affordable housing? And I said, well, it's pretty much whatever we want it to be, or anybody wants it to be. It doesn't really have a strict definition. And in respect of Amlet's Lane, can you please just let us know what sort of affordable housing is that in terms of, is it 80% market rent, is it council rent plus, or you know, what would we think of that as being, or what would somebody who was actually paying the bill think it was? Are we allowed to know what the rent level is or will be?
I can hand over to Louisa, who will give you a more accurate answer. Councillor Newman.
We run the financial appraisals when we make an offer based on the 80% market rent, and then there are 2 rented units there and 3 shared ownership units, and so they're not all for rent, and the rent is set when the schemes are coming closer to handover and another formal valuation is undertaken to set that rent.
Do we have a sort of figure that we charge? Because obviously affordable rent presumably is pretty much the same for that area normally. What would 80% market rent be?
I think, off my head, I would have to, because of the valuation of the properties, I don't think I've got it with me. I can provide that information later.
Yes, would you?
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at performance indicators on page 31 and H02 in particular, well, you were meant to be 20 days for reletting normal voids. I mean, it slipped to 27, which from memory is about the worst it's been for page 47, generally at the agenda side. That seems to be the worst we've had for some time, and the only explanation we get was that in May and June only 40% of homes were relet. Can I ask why?
Of course you can, I'm sure.
Once you've finished quizzing Andrew, I was going to present the housing
Oh, sorry.
operations performance information. Go through that in more detail.
Okay, so defer that until you're okay. Yes, Cole?
No comment is also on that section, so I'll wait until presentation.
Sorry, going back to Amlet's Lane, could I just check, the properties there and this type of project, properties we might be looking into taking over, do they comply or will they have to comply with the Waverley Borough Council design standards? Because, you know, some of the planning applications we've seen coming through don't actually comply with those standards.
It depends on at what point we are joining the conversation. So on one site that we're looking at with a developer, we've shared our design standards and we'll be able to inform the planning application for sites. But some of the sites, they have consent, and there are elements we can inform and add specification requirements to. But certainly once it's got planning, it's harder to make changes. So it depends on.
But it will be something you're considering.
Absolutely, yes. If we're early enough to the discussions, which is what we're planning to do, is build the relationship so handy, then we can help inform their sizes and space standards and that sort of thing.
One of the things we're finding is that developers like to bottom this out early before they go into planning, and so we are having negotiations with 2 or 3 at the moment before they've even submitted the planning application. Right. So that, as Louisa says, we can inform and basically say this is what we require. Housing association properties have to conform to Homes England standards anyway, but ours are more rigorous. So hopefully, Amlet's Lane, we came late to the party, so they are very nice, but they may not be exactly conforming to our design standards. But going forward, yes,
Thank you.
We would expect it to be so.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification as to exactly what it means when it says Q1, Q2, etc. We as a council start in May, but in fact the calendar year starts in January, so quarters for the ordinary calendar are January to March. Can I be enlightened?
So that's that. It's financial year, so we operate April 1st to
It is a
March
financial year,
Yeah.
right,
So
thank you,
our
because that
quarters-
makes a difference to the interpretation of these figures, I think.
Yes, it took me a while to get used to that, but
Yeah.
yes, it's,
Thank you.
am I correct, aren't I?
Yes, absolutely, yes, at first of April.
Any other questions for members? I've got a couple of small ones. Page 42 of our bundle, page 26 of the report, penultimate paragraph, discusses the disabled facilities grants. Do we have an indication, it states there that the level of funding from 2020 onwards is uncertain. Do we have any idea when that's likely to be resolved and any inclination of which way it's likely to be resolved?
We don't have an inclination of exactly when, but we have an inclination that we will get the same or even more.
Okay, that's good news.
Because this seems to be one of those strange funding regimes where they just give us a dollop of money and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it, but we don't mind that because we can use it to help people remain in their homes. So timing, I don't know, but reading the runes, the same or more.
So the levels we're getting are helpful, useful, not causing any stress in terms of us being able to do what we want to do.
The only thing, Chairman, is that causes us stress is being able to spend it all.
Right, I wouldn't know.
Because actually we do get a very healthy grant allocation, and in fact what we are doing and what we're allowed to do from that grant allocation, we're about to introduce a new role into Simon's team, which he will explain to you in more detail at next committee for a grants officer, to help us go out and find more homes in which we can spend the money, because there are households in need out there don't necessarily know, so it's a kind of a marketing job so that we can continue to meet that need and use the grant funding that we've been allocated.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. And then on page 44, the outstanding service plan actions, we had an action there that was off track, deferred to the end of this month. So that's the amber bar towards the top. Are we on track to hit the revised targets?
Yes, I mean in the actions we've got that window from September to December, and we've got to pull together all of the government legislation that's now been implemented. Some of it's been delayed, you see, so it's very difficult to put together a report for management board and then through the committee process. But certainly by the end of the year, so not by the end of September because we don't have all the information yet. And again, the next committee, Simon Brisk, will be able to probably inform me that that's all now done and explain which legislation's delayed and which has been now implemented by the government. It's quite complicated and it's not at the front of my mind to explain it to committee, but he will.
No, we don't need to know that, we just need to know that it's on track as far as it can be.
On track as far as it can be, Chairman, yes.
Right, is everyone happy with the presentation? Thank you very much, Emma. Right, so there's a recommendation. It's recommended that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee consider the Chairman.
Time.
So we've only done housing delivery, so we've got to...
Yeah, the recommendation of the...
Yeah, no. Performance report.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping. It's because I didn't have any questions against the new parliament. Do carry on. Let's have the whole agenda.
I'm here to present the performance information for the housing operations team for the first quarter of the financial year, April to June. So this was written a little while ago, but it's good to look back and look at the successes we've had. So the team started the year positively with the mobilisation of the new responsive repairs and of the maintenance contracts. All staff completed their performance agreement reviews with their managers, giving clear direction and targets for everybody to maximise performance within the team. And corporately we did a staff survey, so I can add a little bit of extra information here. 95% of the staff in housing operations understood their role in relation to the housing service plan, and 100% of the staff were proud of the work and the contribution they made to the borough. So I think that was really nice information, that matches up the importance and the recognition of those performance agreements. We've also been busy supporting the team with professionalisation. We've had success with 4 members of the team getting health and safety certificates, and we've also got people completing Chartered Institute of Housing qualifications. We've had 3 new homes delivered in the first quarter of the year, thanks to Louisa, with conversion of some community rooms, so spaces that weren't being occupied, and we've managed to transform those into homes, so helping people that way. And also, in the first quarter of the year, we started planning our 100 years celebrations for council housing. So I think most of you are aware of that project, and that ran into the summer. So the next time you see me with one of these reports, I'll be able to share all the success that we had with those projects. So moving on to the performance information of the report, you'll see that we do unfortunately have a red box, as Councillor Goodrich alluded to already. We didn't meet target for the relet performance of the year, for the quarter. This was expected due to the mobilisation of the new contractors. What happened was quite a large number of homes were held until the new contract started on the 1st of April. So we've been playing catch up. We've got to deal with that backlog. And with the new contractor coming in, there were a few issues with kitchen and bathroom replacements, which also lengthened the average void time. But I'm pleased to tell you that looking at the figures so far in quarter 2, in July we relet 29 homes with an average of 21 days, and in August we relet 14 homes with an average of 21 days. So that figure is coming down, and I'm hoping with a good September we'll be much more on track than we were with the average of 27 days in quarter 1. Really pleased to show that we're rent collections on target, because if we don't collect the rent we can't deliver the services. We've got over 4,000 accounts in credit with a balance of £602,000. And we've got about 760 accounts in arrears, and that's just over £200,000. So we're still on balance. We've got money in the bank. We've got 256 tenants on universal credit, so this has been an issue that the committee have been aware of, and it's been a real gradual impact. We haven't had a big bang on universal credit. Of those tenants on universal credit, 100 of them are in arrears, and we're working with them on repayment programmes, but 144 are in credit. So it doesn't necessarily follow that if you're on universal credit you are in arrears. And then finally, well not finally, looking at the service plan, all our actions are on target. We've completed the mobilisation. We carried forward an action about reviewing the family support team. That's on target for that to be reviewed and a decision made before the end of March. And then looking at complaints, unfortunately we've got a red bar of poor performance there. Please take into account that we've got a falling number of complaints, and it's been a slight issue with one officer not prioritising complaints. So if you see, we only had 21 complaints in the 3 months, and 11 of those weren't dealt with in time. They were out of time by 1 or 2 days. So the officer that's responsible for that red box is mortified, and we've put some more training in place, reinforced the importance of meeting targets, and much closer monitoring. Staff will now get a trigger email when a complaint is due as a reminder. So we've put steps in place to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And I'm happy to take any questions about the performance of the Housing Operations team.
On page 50, in the section, the general fund comment about the HRA, is that?
Yes.
Yes, okay, right. Seems
it's quite a complex paragraph.
Yes, and yes, I've been trying to decode it.
Yeah.
If I understand, legislation requires that we reduce rents year on year by 1% for these 4 years.
Yes, that's correct.
In the current year, the rent has been reduced by rather more than that. If I understand it, the rent has been reduced by 2.87%. Apparently, in order that, as a result of that, because of the 53 Mondays, that meets the budget. But was that the intention of legislation, or was legislation intended to just reduce the average rent by 1% per year?
The legislation was for all social housing providers to reduce their rents on average by 1% each year. So I think the 53-week has caused an anomaly, and reading that paragraph hurt my head. So I understand there may be some misunderstanding, and I'm happy to take that away and try and clarify that a bit more, because I think I've read it differently to you. So I'll seek some clarity on that and let the committee know.
It's the part where it says the average weekly rents payable were lowered by 2.87% to be collected over 53 weeks. That was the bit which
yes,
seems to
it
indicate.
doesn't. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
fine.
I'll get some clarity on that.
Okay, thank you.
I can answer that one for you.
Oh, can you?
Yeah. But rents go down over the 4-year period. There was 1% drop in rents, which was the government trying to keep housing benefit costs down, presumably, and that sort of thing. That's completely disconnected from the fact that if you've got 53 weeks in a year instead of 50, or Mondays in a year instead of 52, then you spread it over all of those, and that has caused rents to actually go down a lot more than you would expect because of that. That's easy, yeah?
Yep.
But
the problem comes next year, because people are paying quite a bit less rent than they will next year. For next February, there may well be a rise in rents. On top of that, there's only going to be 52 weeks, presumably, next year. I haven't counted in advance, but I think there's only going to be 52. So it's going to be a 3% rise, plus plus maybe 2% that the council will increase its rents by, I would imagine, because that's what the policy was last year, so the intentions. So I think tenants need to be warned that they are to expect that their rents are actually going to go up more, not because it's our fault or anything like that. But
I didn't say it. If the weekly rent goes down by 1%, it goes down by 1%, it's weekly. And that's not what the report says. So you're saying the weekly rent went down, I found the weekly rent, not the yearly rent. The weekly rent...
It's because
the
annual rent
stays
is set, and then the annual rent is split into 52 weeks.
I see. Right.
But this one will be split into 53 weeks,
No, okay,
so it'll go down even more.
okay, fine.
I managed to explain that at the tenants' AGM. But rest assured, we are due to be sending a tenants' newsletter out towards the end of the year, and we will be putting information in that about the change in the rent come the new financial year. Because I think as members and members of staff, we've been very conscious about the impact of universal credit, and we've all been talking about the fact actually universal credit hasn't been a big risk. The big risk is that tenants have got used to paying less rent for the last 4 years, and next year there's going to be some kind of increase. But the good work that the rent accounts team have been doing is, as the rents have been reduced, they've not necessarily reduced people's direct debits, which is why we're £600,000 in credit, to keep people used to paying an amount and getting a bit of a buffer on their rent account ready for the rent increase.
Guest speaker?
Yes, I hesitate to ask about this, but I think I've got to. It's about the Legionnaire infection. I wondered if all opportunities for solving the problem had been exhausted by the specialists, or if they have further measures up their sleeve.
It's an ongoing process with different strategies and the time it takes for different things to embed, but it's an ongoing piece of work that we're looking to reduce and hopefully eradicate the Legionnaire.
If I can comment, it's in my ward. They're putting a huge amount of effort into it, and it's going to be very, very difficult to resolve. So it's being worked on. I think your question was has been answered.
Definitely. Thank you.
It's being kept under control.
Good. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Janine?
Could I make a comment going back to the rent rise? Just to say that at the recent Tenants Panel AGM, Hugh Wagstaff did try to explain this situation to the tenants that were present. I'm afraid there weren't very many. But I'm pleased to hear that there would be a letter going out because it is complicated.
Yeah.
I do understand.
And
A lot of people just cannot quite take it on board.
And by putting it in the newsletter,
Yeah.
it's softer than getting, and you will still get an explanation letter with your rent increase letter, but I think as many times as we can remind people and let them know and tell them in a softer
Thank
way.
you. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
The loss of income from garages forecast, presumably though, if the garages are rebuilt into houses, then there'll be a massive increase. That bit that is low now will be far, far greater when those garages become houses, as in my ward, hopefully.
Yeah, so you'll be
so
swapping your income
Yes,
from
and it will
garages
be
to
increased.
yes.
Yeah, so not too worried about that then, thank you.
I did want to address page 47, the average number of working days taken to relet voids of HO2. I'm not sure, but did Councillor Goodrich want to say more about that? Or was it,
No, my question's been answered. Thank you.
the numbers that are in here, you know, but personal experience, you can see on some of our council estates units which are empty for 6 weeks, up to a year actually sometimes. These figures, I won't say they hide a multitude of sins, but what they don't do is, my understanding is that I think the figures still don't include periods of time when those properties are being worked on as voids. Is that still correct? So if it goes into the hands of Mia's, for instance, or whatever, to do or to put in a kitchen or to do other necessary repairs during the void period, which is obviously when we like to do repairs if we can, when nobody's in there. None of that is included, and that explains why very often places are empty for 2 or 3 months, but they only appear as having been empty for 20 days in the figures. And that's really an area we can work on, I think, to increase our income. There are some very quick fixes and very easy wins for us, I think, in this column as a council, because we've also got a system where in tenancy agreements it says that after they have given notice, a tenant that is leaving should allow housing officers to come around and inspect the place while they're still in the property. I don't think we make much use of that. That will give us a head start on getting other people in, and so obviously there's normally a delay for people moving in somewhere because they've paid rent for a month on the place they're already in, so they can't necessarily move in immediately. They're not homeless, everybody who moves into an empty council property. But we have got some wins there where we could certainly, I think, with a little bit of effort, we would be able to put quite a bit of extra money into the housing revenue account that's at the moment just lost in the numbers now.
Okay, so I think to say that this 27 is a one-off anomaly because of the change in contractor. This committee and the housing team have done a lot of work on looking at the relet time. There are 2 types of empty homes. This one, where we talk about a normal relet, which is something we expect the work to be done in 10 to 15 days. And then the long-term lets is something that we would move a tenant out of that property to do the works. And we've changed that, so we've said we don't move tenants out when we do a kitchen and bathroom. So we expect you to be able to put a kitchen and a bathroom in between 10 and 15 working days. So what's happened here was there was a delay in getting the kitchen and bathrooms fitted because of the new contract, and that's had an impact. The only long-term voids I've been aware of recently have been where there's been a rat infestation, so we've not been able to do the works because of those, and that will show in the next quarter. But please rest assured that we count the relet time from the time the tenancy is terminated until the new tenancy started, so that's on average 27 working days for this quarter. And what you were saying about getting in, we did a whole project called Project 20, which was about getting relets down to 20 working days. And part of the way we've managed to do that is by maximising that notice period. So we get a 4-week notice, we go in, we do an assessment, we work out whether it's a normal void or a long-term void, whether it's going to need a kitchen or a bathroom, and get an idea about what work's going to be required, so that day one, when we get the keys, we can start that work process.
Comfortable with that?
Entirely counterintuitive because my eyes see differently.
Right, okay.
If you've got any individual addresses you want to raise with me, I'm happy to take those offline and investigate. Because the other thing I do, I'm always a bit of a stickler with voids and relets, and that whenever I'm working out the statistics and looking at the statistics, I'm always looking at how many properties have we got empty at the moment as well. So we do have properties empty at Oxford Ridge where they've been identified to be demolished, and so it's keeping track on those ones and making sure that they don't disappear.
But
So
we don't want them
I
to
would
muddy
say-
these figures, the long-term
No,
and,
no.
and reasoned ones. But
Yeah.
the issue, I think, you see, these are average figures. So if we're saying where it was 15 and 16 a year ago, then for every one that was taking 25 days, then we were turning another one around in 5 days to balance it. These are average figures.
Yeah.
Now, the reality of the issue, well, what I would say, obviously, it's quite easy to check because we should be able to, across the board, look at our numbers for rent income and see exactly what percentage that will reflect the void.
And we've actually, so when we do budget setting, we allow a certain amount for void loss, and that amount has come down year on year because we've got so much better at turning properties round. I think when we first started looking at this as probably a good few years ago, we had about 80 to 70% of all our voids were classed as long-term void because people thought they were difficult and gave them a long-term void label, whereas now, less than 10%, probably 5% are actual long-term void. The majority of our properties are turned around as quickly as possible. And because the group's been so keen to scrutinise voids because it makes such a difference to the income and actually providing homes, I have in the past provided mode information, so the most frequent amount of days it's taken. And when we started looking at that, we had a whole range of things taking 50, 60, 80 days. But it's come right down, the curve's come right down to 5, 10, 15, and then just a few, kind of maybe 30, 35 days.
So it's been worth sharing that because that has been one of the big successes that this committee delivered. Councillor James?
No.
You, sorry.
Yep.
I beg your pardon. Councillor Ellis. Sorry, yeah.
That's
sorry,
okay.
Alison.
Just a comment, going back a few years, we used to work as councillors with the Tenants Association, and we used to have regular visits to voids. And my comment is that I think we were all quite shocked at the condition of some of the properties that were coming back to Waverley and the work that was necessary to bring those houses back into habitable accommodation. But it was a good thing. We actually worked very hard, very well together on that issue.
Thank you. I mean, just to answer that, as far as I'm aware, the tenant panel have been stopped from doing that.
Oh, sorry.
So, for what reason, I don't know. The previous chair was involved in that. I wasn't. But my question really is surrounding complaints, and it's not directed on solely to the housing. It's the whole board. We have 57 complaints over the last quarter and the last 20 on level 2, but we have no indication of whether they were justified or not. And I don't know if that's recorded somewhere else, but I think that would be quite interesting to know, because then it could be showing a pattern that we can rectify to stop what complaints we are getting.
So historically, you may recall, I used to give you a report on complaints which had a whole host of information, but that's something we can add to this report. Just the number of whether they're upheld. Or,
Yes, it's not particularly what happened. It's not really relevant to this board, but justified or unjustified.
Okay, that's a very helpful suggestion. Thanks, Annalisa. Right. Okay, so apologies for my woeful attempt to try and curtail that very stimulating section. Right, can we progress now? Right, okay, so there is a recommendation. It's recommended that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee considers the performance of the service areas under its remit as set out in Annex 1 of this report and makes any recommendations to senior management or the executive as appropriate. So we've certainly got one suggestion there. I'm sure Timber's caught everything. So good. Ready to move on? I'll give the floor to Louisa to accept.
Indeed. Right, this item starts at page 63, and I'd like to start by circulating a programme which links to this update report. This was just to demonstrate to members, following discussion with Councillor Seaborn, our development programme visually, so we can provide an update, but this is just to demonstrate the visual delivery of our sites. So I've put it into two blocks which are under the key: pre-development planning and procurement, which are the light blue, and on-site the dark blue. In addition to that dark blue band, there's a 12-month defect period, but I've not added that onto the chart. I've just left it that it's a given that there'll be a 12-month defect period. And it's just to demonstrate the progress made on these sites, the number of homes, the net gain on each of the sites, and the bedroom mix that's being delivered. On the left-hand side, you've got a red, amber, green rating, which is to just indicate to members of the committee that we're on track, or if there's any delays in the project, and obviously if there's anything that's stalled, it would be red. And just to report, at the moment we don't have any sites that are marked red. These are sites that we have either on site or are bringing forward, and are we have consulted with members and residents on. We have a number of sites that are council-owned assets in terms of land, and officers of the housing development team are looking at them in terms of feasibility of delivery, and that can be seen in the very bottom table. These are ones that officers of the team are working on at the moment to bring forward, and as we work up a scheme, they will be added to the programme so we can actually demonstrate delivery going forward as well. That's the programme, and then I can just give a quick update on the report itself, and then answer any questions. I'd just like to flag in the report, as Andrew says, on the second page, that Otford Bridge Site A is progressing well. We have some pictures of the current site in the My Otford newsletter, which I can leave on the table if people are interested in having a look at, and that just provides the local community with an update on not only the sites but other community matters. It's working very well with working with FACEM and their resident liaison officer, engaging with the community, not only about site matters but also about the community benefits programme, which consists of they've sponsored trips, they've visited the school, they've had school children onto the site when it was first starting out, so they're just trying to build the engagement with the community and offer those additional benefits. The last item is listed as Skillway, and they're working with Skillway as they are with MPS and FACEM to look at things like CV writing and items like that. So it's just about trying to build a community benefit programme on the back of our developments at Otford Ridge and elsewhere. Site B, we're about to go out to tender for a build contractor, and Site C, we're preparing the tender packs, which will go live next year. What else could I draw attention to? The refurbishment works at Otford Ridge in phases 2 and 3. They're progressing well and due to complete in March next year. So that's some external and internal full refurbishment works. And the other just item that's marked as amber on the forecast is the Aaron's Hill site, which we're liaising with Carla, who have acquired the site at Lucia Lane, Otford Park, and that site links to the Aaron's Hill site, so we're working with them to look at how we can move forward with the point of access. The other two sites that we'll be submitting planning for shortly are the Chiddingfold and Church sites. We've completed neighbourhood consultation with residents and members there. We had a recent meeting with the Church Parish, which was very useful and welcome and very positive in its nature. So progressing on from that, we will be submitting an application. The same applies to Chiddingfold. We will be submitting applications for Queensmead, Hartsgrove and Parkfields shortly. I'm just happy to answer any questions.
And Louisa, could I just make a comment, please? On site A, where you've talked about what Thacom are doing, which is great, you say the local church, Scouts, primary school and Skillway. I just wanted to make it clear that there are no Scouts in that area. You're actually talking about the Scout and Guide headquarters building.
Yes.
And could that be made clear to people?
Okay.
And Andrew said there might be some refurbishment happening. I don't know.
Thacom have instructed a survey of the building at the moment, and then we'll see where that goes.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I notice on the Royal Road Farnham application, it was refused. One of the objections, it said the adverse effect of the Thames Basin Heaths SPA. Does that mean it was potential adverse effect, or was it decided that there was an adverse effect?
No, it was the fact that, if my memory serves me rightly, we hadn't quoted that we would make a contribution to the SPA in our report, and that was noted as an action if we were to resubmit and reconsider.
Make a contribution
well, you have to contribute financially to the impact that your development has.
in terms of a SAM or something like this, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's physical. It would be nice actually if I could understand how many bedrooms we're gaining. I see the net gain figures that we've got in the second column on the sheet you currently put around. I think for Otford Bridge we're not actually losing sizes of houses. That a lot of redevelopments you get rid of larger houses and have an awful lot more smaller houses. So it looks like you're gaining, but you're not actually gaining the number of bedrooms, but you are gaining the number of units. I know there is and has been an issue, obviously, over the cost and finding people who can develop the site in a timely manner. I think we're still looking at, the end of 2023 for Site F to be in completion. I assume that that's also a projection. Still, that obviously that's subject to variation according to contracts and whatever.
In terms of the sites E and F, the whole delivery of Otford Ridge as a regeneration scheme is dependent on moving people from one site to the other, so it has to be phased. So Site A, for example, the first 15 homes, residents on sites B and C have indicated where they would like to move to, whether it's to A or to somewhere else on a permanent or temporary basis. So once we've moved and rehomed those people, we will then look at bringing those sites forward, and the same will follow through. So because we are delivering 37 new homes on Oxford Ridge site, there's capacity in there to work with the allocations team to actually look at residents on sites E and F and see whether they'd like to move to there, which will help us in our programme of bringing forward those sites. And so the programme at Oxford Ridge is more complex than others. So,
I appreciate there's a lot of
yeah,
juggling in
there
there.
is.
I think one of the concerns when you look at the numbers is that we've got a net gain there because there are a lot of buybacks which are quite expensive, buying back houses which have been sold under right to buy many years ago, or over many years. So we've gained 15 there, and there's a net gain over the entire Oxford Ridge development of 38, plus 38 homes altogether. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those are of a similar size. We're not actually losing a lot of bedrooms, so to speak, in that. The net gain of 38, but the overall cost of the project at the moment is looking at 23 million. And if you divide one by the other, one has to question affordability in terms of the other. And now I appreciate that regeneration, you spent money. I know at the Chantries in the 90s, £1 million was spent and didn't gain a single home from it because pitched roofs were put on instead of flat roofs and things like that. So regeneration does cost money. But when you look at what a net gain of 38 homes might be expected to cost us in terms of millions, and the spending of £23 million, I thought that, I'm not generally going to be here on this committee, that it might be something this committee would want to look at.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I poor Louisa gets me asking for pictures all the time on this, and I've made a guess at what might be useful. But this is the first time this committee has seen a graph representing where we're going in terms of our delivery, which I think is incredibly important to everybody. The new administration has stated that it wants to increase our game on delivery of affordable and particularly social housing, and so having a representation that shows us where we're going is all important. So we could spend all evening debating this. If you've got views on how you'd like this representation boosted or supplementary graphs or figures or whatever, please feed it back to Louisa, copy it to me, so we can, because if we get 15 different opinions, then we're going to get nowhere. I'll try and act as an arbiter, but it's your report, and I want it to quickly bed down to something that we see at every meeting, we become very familiar with, so that Louisa can talk to the variations from that as we go on, so we can track how things are going. We also have Councillor Rosamond with us, who's portfolio holder. Do you have anything to say at this point? Because we're very enthusiastic not to create too much work for Louisa. You clearly want this kind of information Absolutely. As well. So if you'd like to work with us and point us in the right direction to getting something that tells the story we want but isn't creating any extra work, I think that'd be very useful.
I think sharing that information is going to be key to driving it forward. And I know how passionate the team are in providing it, so I'm behind them in that.
I think if I may, Chairman, I'd like to come back on Councillor Hyman's point. I think to say £23 million for, 38 new homes, that does not give a picture, because actually the total number of new homes is 105 plus all the refurbishments, plus the fact that the houses that we've demolished are not fit for purpose. They basically have, in any other words, an outside loo, just a single skin thing at the back, small, designed at a certain time, big sort of gardens. So actually you've got to look at the whole regeneration project and what is being delivered, not only in terms of additionality, but in terms of quality housing for our tenants, and making the best use of that site going forward, so it's something that is fit for purpose and we as a council can be proud of for years. So it's not simply the additional homes equals 23 million quid. You just can't look at it like that. You've got to look at the whole project and what is actually being delivered for our residents, and the whole number of new homes, plus the demolition. That's something you have to do. But so many of the properties, they look nice. When you get inside them, they desperately needed something doing to them. And so either by refurbishment or through new build, that's what we're doing. The right to buys, they haven't, the buybacks haven't been that many
No, I mean, not recently. Initially there was initial buybacks,
Yeah,
but
so
we have-
it was a council decision to regenerate the estate, and therefore I think we've just got to look at that overall budget for what is going to be delivered in terms of quality as well as numbers.
And in terms of, you know, for example, Site F, we have acquired one home to deliver this site, so we're not talking enormous numbers of buybacks by site.
No, that's the benefit of these meetings. So Councillor Hunt is quite right to question
Oh,
the
yes,
value
absolutely
proposition,
fine.
and you've given us
Yeah.
an eloquent explanation of where we are. So, Councillor Goodrich, did you?
Yes, Chairman, on the forward programme, I see that Godalming has 4 sites. One site that just sort of screams at me for being suitable for converting into council houses is the old pub that was on the junction of Mead Row and Chalk Road, which had a planning application for a Tesco store, which had an unfortunate fire and a new roof, which I know nothing about. It just seemed, I just was inquiring whether the council has its beady eye on that or not.
Yes.
Good answer. Right, any further questions on this particular item? In which case, the recommendation is that we note the progress with current council housing developments. So, duly noted. For future meetings, I would like us to see noting and commenting as appropriate rather than just noting. We've been noting for instance the TV at home, but we've noted and we've commented, and that will be reflected in the minutes, so thank you. Right, thanks Louisa. Next item is a big one, and hopefully we'll have a healthy discussion around this. It's to review year 1 achievements of the 5-year Waverley housing strategy. So, Andrew.
Thank you.
Oh, it's yours again.
Yes, it's the Andrew Smith show tonight, I'm afraid. But, never mind. I think it's useful for the committee to just see where we've come. So in April 2018, we adopted a 5-year housing strategy that we worked on and consulted on over a number of months. And we were very keen that it should be a living document and reviewed and recalibrated and realigned every year. Now, unfortunately, because of the election and the fact that the ONS cycling the way it is, we've come to this towards the end of September. So it's, in effect, the completion of the first year is almost 6 months out of date. But I think it will give committee an idea not only of what the strategy sets out to do and what has been achieved and moved forward in the first year, but also give the committee an opportunity to feed into what we can insert, delete, redefine going forward. So it is a living, breathing thing that we're constantly looking at and working on. For example, when we wrote the strategy, we had no idea really that we would be making quite good progress into the Section 106 housing market. So all sorts of, it has to change, and government policy. And we really don't know what government policy on housing will be going forward. We had some light under Theresa May's administration on the introduction of social rent and the understanding that good quality rented accommodation was a vital part. Boris seems to have pulled that back a bit, still using the awful home ownership term, which is fine, but it's not good for everyone. So we just really don't know. So the strategy has to reflect government policy, a new corporate strategy, and all those other things. So I just wanted to fill that in. During the first year, Alice Lean, who would be with us tonight, but has little children to look after, has done something I never do. She's done this pretty little diagram. I tend to do words, but I think actually this, in one glance, shows the major achievements under the first year of the strategy. So 157 affordable homes completed. So that's 157 homes, rent, shared ownership. The percentages are around what they should be in terms of the strategic housing market assessment, 64%, 36%. We've seen rural housing needs surveys carried out in a number of villages. During the first year of the strategy, I went out to a number of parishes and town councils to present the strategy and take questions and feedback from that, and particularly in the rural areas, concerned that they should see the villages should see local needs affordable housing developed. 45 new council homes as a part of that 157. A good number of aids and adaptations under the disabled facilities grants, the introduction of a handy person service. So that's like a, I suppose you could call it aids and adaptations light. So somebody will go in and fit a handrail or just small things that will make somebody returning from hospital or enable them to stay in their home and not be moved out. So just a number of things. Unfortunately, and I took the decision that committee should see the action plan. And the action plan is a complete tome, and if you've read through it, you'll know that all sorts of things are there and they've been monitored. And I think it would take us a long time to go through that. I'm happy to take questions on that. I suspect, though, that one recommendation from the committee will be to trim that down somewhat, because it is very comprehensive. And it's far easier to set out on a 5-year strategy like that and then begin to refine your objectives than the other way around. So really I think that's all I want to say, because I would like to give the committee, through the chairman, the opportunity to ask questions for clarification and also suggestions and pointers as to what we need to see going forward. The housing strategy is quite an overarching document, so it's housing development, housing delivery through housing associations. It feeds into the homelessness work that Mike and his team do, the private sector housing. And also in the report I've mentioned the idea of forming a local housing company, which is quite a different animal, to develop private market rented housing. And that's something that's being thought about and discussed at the moment, mainly as an income generator for the council to help us with our income going forward, but also the provision of good quality, well-managed private rented accommodation in Waverley meets a distinct housing need. And so that will be unpacked, I think, as the strategy moves forward into its second year. So as I say, I'm happy to take questions and be guided by the committee as to how we move forward.
I also mentioned the point about the local housing company, the action on page 81. It also mentions section 106 in that, but is that a separate point?
Yes,
So, okay.
yes, it's a separate point. One of the aims of the strategy was to look at, I think, up to 3 different models of delivering local needs housing. So through the 106, agreements with developers is one, and the possibility of setting up a company or delivering homes through the general fund is another.
So this, I think, as you said, this route would be to actually go and borrow money on the market and then use that, or acquire money in some way.
Yes. Yes.
And use that to develop private
yes.
rental accommodation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a long list.
I've stunned them into silence, Chairman.
Going to the report, when we had our workshop, really helpful workshop 3 weeks ago, one thing that came up was the number of senior citizens that are going to be looking for specialist accommodation, but it was the numbers we were given at that meeting or at that workshop were more around Surrey in general, and so I've asked the question. I just want to reinforce that. Will some work be done to try and break down so we can understand? Is that in the work that's already being done, or is it forward?
Thank you, Chairman. One thing that we produced alongside the housing strategy last year was an annex on affordability and housing need, which actually proved for members one of the most useful parts of the whole exercise. And that is currently in our work programme to refresh that and emphasise older persons and also those who we predict will be suffering from things like dementia, because that came up at our workshop. it's interesting that I picked up recently in the press that the number of older people seeking help for homelessness has risen by 39% in the last 5 years. And 25,000 people over the age of 60 asked their local authority for help with homelessness last year. So I don't know that we've seen a particular increase in older people presenting as homeless, and Mike can comment on that perhaps in a moment. But there is a national trend, and so therefore we have got to look at how we reflect that in our planning, I mean our housing planning rather than, well also in our actual planning for the right kind of accommodation for those, not necessarily in their 50s and 60s, but their 70s, 80s and 90s. So yes, Chairman, that's again, you see, this is how important it is to nuance the strategies it goes forward, because things will come in as we look at the situation and as time goes on.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. James?
Do we have the opportunity to build, as in the private sector, areas of only for over 55s and over 60s, because all the, being well over that age myself,
Yes.
when we did one at Bramshot, we tried to get, which was an overview, we tried to get a small portion of that for a housing association over 55s, but they would not take that on, so we just had a committed sum, which we had to do it elsewhere. But if we're building those sort of areas, would that be something we could look at to put?
We could do, Councillor James. I think it's more now moving towards those who are considerably older and with higher needs. So the important thing is in our design standards in our building going forward, and with housing associations as well, it's making sure that the homes that are built are lifetime homes. That you can live in them almost until you can't anymore. So all of the necessary infrastructure is put in for things like care line and all the kind of things that you require as you get older. The other thing in the strategy is that during the period of the strategy we want to see one new extra care scheme developed in the borough. Extra care, you have your own flat. Usually the requirement is that you need at least 2 hours of care per week, and that might just be cleaning to start with. But as your needs increase, so the menu of options for your care increases, and that can be met through an extra care scheme. So you have a landlord. Sometimes the landlord also provides the care, but more often than not the landlord then contracts with a specialist care provider that works with the tenants and the residents to increase the level of care as that is needed. And that's a model that's working well.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, thank you.
That's a good point. Perhaps if I can just develop on that. So that's page 91, I think, in terms of the plan, the bottom item there. It says commit to find a site for at least one new build extra care scheme.
Yes.
So that's finding a site by March 2023. I think it'd be useful for us to know when the rooms might actually be available, rather than
yes.
It's actually 3 or 4 years to get to the point where we are ready to take it forward to a development.
One of the things that we've been trying to do is, in the first year of the strategy, is engage with the county council to get their plan on delivering extra care in the borough. That's not proved particularly easy, partly because there's been various officers and they've come and gone. We looked at not particularly extra care, but up on Oxford Ridge at providing some of the homes on site B for special needs. That kind of fizzled out with the county. So one of the things that we need to think about is whether we ourselves as a council develop an extra care scheme and then contract out the care. Now that's something we could do. That's a big project, but it's perfectly doable.
And that might be...
What did you say? Bring it on? She just said bring it on. Now, I ought to say that this young lady has developed extra care schemes in the past.
One, not me.
Well, we've only got one in the strategy, so
That's all right.
Right.
Can I pass in? But if we look at applications that are for, only over 55s or over 65s, that's when we could shove in a council bit that they have to have, the affordable
We could
quota,
do. We could
and
do.
then the cares on site.
Could
That's
do.
what I was trying to,
We could do. Yes.
and people will be developing those kind of sites around here more
Yes.
and more, because we're all getting
Yes, they
older.
will. Yes. Yes. But I think the specialised accommodation will be more for those who are older and in high need. So I'm 58 and I don't want to go into an over.
Well, I mean, I'm 73 and I don't want to go either. Well, you'll put your children
That's
there.
why I was very enthusiastic that we get the numbers
Yes,
back to
and-
you know.
Yeah,
We took that immediately on board, Chairman, and that's been fed into an earlier review of the annex for the housing strategy than we had predicted.
That's excellent. And then it also feels like this might well be a piece of work that this committee can help with going down the road, you know, a piece of detailed scrutiny, and talk about that with the portfolio holder and come to some constructive arrangement.
Thank you, Chairman. Andrew, what's the situation with the 6 acres farm scheme, which, as you say, the SEC cancelled?
Right, what page is
That's
that?
on page 91.
Yeah. Let's have a look. That I would have to find out. I'm not sure of the details of that, Councillor Marriott. I need to look into that. I can't put my mind on what 6 acres farm is at the moment. I would need to look it up, but I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I still have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I've got, we're going through all of the coloured pages, are we? So
I would suggest that I've got a long list. I'm going to
You
deal
go
with it.
through and-
No, I don't intend to. I mean, I intend to take most of it offline. I've
Yes.
got one more point I prefer to do, but yeah, and likewise, I think if you read it in detail, it's almost inevitable you're going to have multiple points to bring up. I think it's appropriate to take it offline with Alice or through you.
Yes, just to say, Chairman, members, if any of you would like to come in and have an hour or so with Alice, Lean and myself, you'd be very welcome to do so. I think Chairman's idea to drill into some of this detail is probably better offline, but we're very, very happy to welcome you with tea or coffee to my office.
Sorry?
No.
no, okay.
Right, okay. So if you've got a headline, Jerry, that you want, that you want to bring up, fine, but if you've got a list, then we'll do
this is just there were 3 or 4 things which I'd noted, and I thought that you were going to go through them. That would save me doing them because you'd pick them up
I think
anyway.
we'll be here all night if we, because likewise I have a list. I think the headlines, let's bring them up here. If there's lots of smaller points, let's bring them up with Andrew and Alice offline.
But the headline to me is that we, after many years, we are building council houses again. That's great. And it's taken some relearning because obviously there's a big gap where all the skills were lost and the in-house teams were disappeared from every council.
No, we're rebuilding then, aren't we?
We are. Not everyone has.
Very good.
There was one point that I wanted to bring up that colleagues may well want to have a view on, and that's on page 80. It says in the first column, develop a new affordable housing delivery plan every 5 years. In the next column it says review annually, and we were discussing this earlier. It suggests that a rolling document and a rolling plan is probably much more powerful than actually having you say it's not static, but on the other hand, the first column says it's a specific 5-year plan. Do you want to comment on that?
I think a rolling document and I think when we first introduced presenting a 5-year plan, we didn't give the committee a development update every time the committee met. And certainly the committee in the past asked for that, and I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. So you get a continual progress report. I also think a 5-year and a 10-year plan is good when you're looking at our own land. But if you're going to section 106, you cannot predict what you're going to get, what you're going to bid for, what you're going to succeed on. So 18 months ago, or even less than that, I would have never dreamt that we would have got 5 units at Amberts Lane in Cranley. They weren't in any plan. So So I think a rolling programme information update to committee, every committee, in between committee, if committee would like that, at any given time, you can ask Louisa and I for an update on any scheme or where we are, we can do that for you. And I think that gives committees much, much better information than an annual review when we'd actually be looking at it at every committee. That's my personal opinion.
The handy person service was mentioned.
Yes.
I'm embarrassed to own up to the fact that I have too often found myself outside my front door with the keys inside. So I won't go into issues. But I actually phoned the service. A very charming gentleman came along and fitted a key safe for me. He also said, "That's a big step up to your porch. I'll put this handrail on for you," which was done very well. And I said, "Well, will you give me a bill? Will you be sending a bill?" And he said, "No, it's all right, Waverley pays for that." And I have to say that I was quite surprised at that.
Well,
not that I've got lots of money to throw around, but I could have afforded to.
it's not means tested, you see, Councillor Ellis, and it's not Waverley per se that's paid for that. It's through disabled facilities grants from county and through the CCG. So that it simply isn't means tested, because to means test every need for a handy person to go out and do that little piece of work for you and other residents would be a job and a half, and it just wouldn't be worth it. So
just thought that clearly this could be expensive for the council. Thank you.
Chairman, I mean, great on the successes, but there are one or two reds. Now,
yes,
some of the reds are outside our control, like Surrey County Council. But there are some reds which have not been achieved because you have no capacity, and I'm particularly thinking on page 104. And a priority, for example, on MD1 seems to have changed. Should we be worried about these? And is there something that we should be putting pressure on to provide capacity or something? Because it seems to me, I mean, we talked earlier about empty homes, for example, being not very good business plan because we get no money for them. But trying to do a register of empty homes has been something which we haven't been able to do. And it could be important. So I'm really asking the question of the things not achieved, which I suspect some of them are very frustrating for officers. Is there anything that we should be doing to try and make these achievable?
I think on MD1, again, that's where we are working with groups, and there has been no appetite within the CLTs that have been emerging in Waverley to look at empty homes. So in a sense, that's something which it's in our strategy, because we get funding from the government for community-led housing, and we've got working with Community Land Trust in Hazelmere. On the issue of empty homes, I mentioned earlier that we're going out to recruit a grants officer, and part of the role of that new officer will be to develop a proper empty homes policy. We simply haven't had the resources. Neither really has there been the political will in the past to make this a priority. Very difficult, time consuming to bring empty homes back into use. Because, I mean, Councillor James may be aware of one particular property in Chiddingfold. The amount of time we spent with our lawyers and myself and the private sector housing manager, who was also responsible for empty homes, trying to bring that particular property, contact the owner, and to get some kind of resolution to that, meeting after meeting after meeting, and that is not unique. So it's, I have to say, Councillor Goodridge, in one sense it's been in the too difficult box, but I think it needs to be addressed. Certainly it's a government priority, and we are going to put some officer resource into looking at that, which we've not done before. So.
Okay, so if there are other things that come up that are on your list and you want answers to, please feed that in to Andrew and Alice Lean, and do share anything exciting with the rest of the team, because the key at the start was that this is a living, live, rolling document, and we need to know what's in it and keep it moving in the right direction. Good. So the recommendation then is that the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to note the achievements against year 1 of the housing strategy and initial findings from the 4-year profiling reports, which will inform any realignment of the strategy during year 2, and to make comment and suggestions regarding this realignment for year 2. So I think we've had a stab at that. But today's not the only day we need to think about that. If you have bright ideas for subsequent meetings, let us know in advance and get them on the agenda to discuss. Lovely, right. So, the next item is could be very painful, but it's usually a pleasure to hear the results of Michael's team, because he does lead such an excellent tradition, has led such an excellent response to homelessness in the borough. I think we're going to hear the same again, hopefully. Michael, thank you.
Just before I do that, just because someone raised it about homelessness and older households, I mean, certainly what I'm picking up, because another hat I wear is I'm a trustee of the York Road project in Woking, which is a homeless hostel. And certainly the statistics from there is actually the profile of people who are rough sleeping is actually getting lower and lower. So gone are the days when a traditional rough sleeper was sort of 50, 60, 70 plus, hardened drink and everything. Often it is young people in their 20s and 30s that emergency hospital's actually catering for. So certainly, and the same with my team, a lot of the people dealing with our families or young single people, and the challenge is actually having some of the additional needs they may have in relation to mental health, drug, alcohol issues. So that's just, if you like, an observation based on that. So in terms of the homeless strategy, we're required to produce a homeless strategy every 5 years within legislation. So we produced our strategy just over a year ago. So this is really an update on where we are with delivering on that homeless strategy. I think the biggest challenge when we brought the strategy a year ago was the introduction of what's called the Homeless Reduction Act, which was a very big change in homeless legislation. And as Councillor Seaborn has pointed out, we've had a number of years of success in preventing homelessness, and this was a big risk for us with new legislation, because when it was introduced in Wales, it was very challenging for the Welsh authorities to manage homelessness, and for a lot of them temporary accommodations went up. So I'm very pleased to announce that a year or so on, the new legislation has not resulted in a spike in our temporary accommodation numbers, which is really pleasing, and credit to the team in the way they've professionally adjusted to that new legislation and helped homeless households. So in terms of our temporary accommodation numbers are certainly a success from the last year, so that's really gratifying. The other sort of areas of really why we've been able to do that is really our work to try and help people access private rented accommodation. That is always a challenge, because to find private rented accommodation that is affordable for people who are reliant on welfare benefits is an ongoing challenge for us. But thankfully, again, through a lot of partnership working, we've continued to sort of maintain that success in preventing homelessness. The I guess one of the challenges which the report flags up is we have benefited from some what's called flexible homelessness grant from the government over the last 3 years. It's 3 years. And we're in the last year of that flexible homelessness grant. And what we've been able to do with this grant is purchase additional supported housing bed spaces in supported housing schemes within Waverley, but also in Surrey, and then we can nominate people who are threatened with homelessness who have got support needs to these units of accommodation. And we've also had to use that additional government money to front up rent deposit money for people, because what we're finding increasingly is a landlord will just point blank refuse to take anyone on benefits. But the one thing that where they may change their mind is if we can front up 6 months rent in advance, that actually gives them that cushion. They know that the first 6 months rent has been paid, and then we require the tenant to pay us back either through their benefits or through their employment. So it just gets them over that threshold to access private rented. But we're having to front up a lot of money. So we're spending for supported housing placements and extra money spent to help people access private rented accommodation. We're spending about 200,000 each year, and that's flexible homeless grants. So that's not within our general fund budget, that's extra that we're having to use. Now we're in the last year of that money. Thankfully for this year, we've got an award of over £400,000 for this year. And we can carry it into future years, but what we don't know yet is whether we're going to get a grant for the following years. I know the government have now done their spending review, and so certainly the headlines of that is that homelessness is a priority, so we're optimistic we will get more flexible homelessness grant, but certainly a lot of our success in managing homelessness, keeping the numbers in temporary accommodation down, is based on having that additional money from the government. So we've got sort of fingers crossed, if you like, that we'll continue to get government grant for the next year. So I'll end it there, and then obviously open up for any questions from people.
Yes, Becky.
Oh, thank you. Well, I see under accommodation on page 111, that we've been able to acquire bed spaces in Milford, which is my ward. I think this is very pleasing, actually.
Yeah.
I don't quite know whether it is a real increase in accommodation or whether it is just cosmetic.
No, that is a very good question. It's why we've got those additional bed spaces is a couple of years ago Surrey County Council had to look at their finances, and they had to cut their housing related support funding to a lot of supported housing schemes. So they were funding those units in Milford. We were benefiting from them because we could nominate Waverley households to them, but with the withdrawal of the funding, the scheme potentially could have closed, because Surrey were then saying, well, we haven't got the money to keep paying for this. So we felt it was in our interest to maintain our good record in preventing homelessness to actually step in, and we could do that because we had this flexible homelessness grant. So whilst Surrey were having to cut back on that, it was just fortuitous that the government had actually said ahead of the new homeless legislation they would give districts and boroughs additional money, and we felt it was a very good use of that money to use it for support. So it's not extra bed spaces, but it means we do have more control over it, particularly because under Surrey it was aimed at young families, whereas because we're, if you like, paying for it, we can actually ask the housing provider to actually raise the age range so that we can actually nominate a broader range of households to the scheme, which suits us. So,
thank you. Can I just follow up with asking if there's some doubt about whether this grant will continue, are we able to make representations about that specifically, especially as in view of the history of the cuts to Surrey resulting in our having this opportunity? I mean, it's going to be a negative, isn't it, if we don't get any more funding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have made representations very recently, because I know our Chief Executive, Tom Howard, I think, met with MPs and other people from government, and one of what Tom did was email down there, are there any things you want us to raise with members of the government in terms of this? So we certainly did raise that. And I am following the spending review and the main headline that the government is intending to actually even put more money into homeless prevention, though the devil will be in the details as to where that is targeted. I am cautiously optimistic that we will get flexible homelessness grant into next year. And what we have done, because we've had it for 3 years, we haven't spent it all in every year, so we have got some in reserve. I think we're estimating that we might have potentially 600,000 available to carry into the next. So in a sense, we're covered maybe for 3 years, 200,000 roughly for the next 3 years. But we really want the government to commit to doing that, because I don't know whether next year they're going to give us 50,000, 400,000 like they gave us this year, or what. So we're in the dark a bit, but we have been quite prudent in trying to spread that money into future years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So will we have the chance to know, is this going to be an item in the...
I think we will know, I'm guessing maybe by December we may get an announcement. We do have a member of, talking about our homelessness forum which got coming up, we do have the homelessness specialist, Rebecca Ireland, coming from the Ministry of Communities and Local Government. So she will be doing a presentation on the national picture. It'd be great if she could announce to us, actually, you are going to get flexible homelessness grant. It still might be a bit too early. It really is down to those government announcements, and so we'll see. But we'll certainly, we can certainly let members of this committee know what the outcome is of that.
Thank you.
You mentioned somewhere in the report about the increase in rough sleeping in the Farnham area.
Yes.
I don't know how to measure it, but I presume there's not a KPI for rough sleepers.
What we do have to do is, again, it's a government requirement, is every autumn we have to carry out, and every local authority has to carry out what's called an estimate of rough sleeping. So we do that in the middle of November along with all the Surrey authorities. We coordinate, so we all do the same day, so that we're not double counting, or if people move from place to place. So we are required to do that. Our last estimate was 2 rough sleepers. So we'll be doing another estimate this November, but we have certainly noticed a spike in people appearing to be rough sleeping and or begging, and actually it's quite a nuanced issue really, because someone can appear to be begging, but they might not be homeless. They might actually just be financially doing that. There is intelligence that it can be a sign of modern day slavery, where sometimes people are actually dropped into affluent areas in order to beg, and they themselves can be victims of modern day slavery, being forced to do that. And so part of it is actually getting to the root problem and knowing who the people are. Some people will come to Waverley and beg, but they might be rough sleeping, but their connection maybe with another borough. So actually getting to the bottom of it is the key thing. So just so you know what we do in regard to that, any member of the public is encouraged to report to an online system called StreetLink, where they can report. So if any member of the public sees someone who's sleeping rough, they can report it to the government website, and they then contact the local authority within which the area is, and they say, look, you've got a rough sleeper living in rough sleep potentially in this location. And what we do with Waverley is we will then ask the York Road Project, who we commission, to go out and actually engage with those rough sleepers, find out where they're from, offer them accommodation, encourage them to come to Waverley if there's a connection to Waverley, and we will try and resolve their housing difficulties. What the challenges can be, though, is what we can offer isn't often what a rough sleeper may want. If we're offering, for example, a homeless hostel in Woking, they might not want to go to a homeless hostel in Woking. And there can be a multitude of reasons why that is. As I say, some of it might just be financially based, that they're actually doing quite well from their point of view in terms of getting money to possibly finance a drug or alcohol habit from continuing to sleep rough in Farnham or any other area. So it's a tough one to crack, but it's certainly something we've noticed an upsurge in that. So the interest of our estimate will be up, but we're still, as part of our forum, we're actually going to be trying to discuss this whole issue of begging and rough sleeping, and there may be some actions coming out of that as to whether we can do any more. Part of an approach that Guildford are doing, which we might build on, is if you're offering support and help for someone who's genuinely homeless, if they're then refusing it, then the next thing is what enforcement action can happen, because it can have a negative impact on the street scene, on businesses, if people are begging and rough sleeping. So it's getting that balance between offering genuine help for people that really need it, but also maybe taking enforcement action. And this is something that Andrew, with his community safety hat on, is going to be developing with Katie Webb.
Measuring once per year isn't very good. I understand it's
a
requirement. But are you lacking data? I mean, obviously rough sleepers are fairly obvious in sense because they are by definition on the street. So, do you not need to do it more often?
Well, in a sense, that's the value of StreetLink, because it's not like we're waiting until each year. The StreetLink is a report active, every day. We could potentially, if there were loads of rough sleepers, we could be getting a report, and it might be the same person, but we can then ask and investigate that.
That's good. I think Rivers and his team should be congratulated. We congratulate you every year, and then you provide a graph on page 111 to show you had the best year for the last 7, having naught. Because I can remember a year or so ago, you told us with the new legislation, it was going to be easier for people outside our patch to come in and land on our doorstep to be housed. Have we, because of our good record?
Yes.
What we don't have in front of us is what the other boroughs around us record is, which is usually far worse than ours by a long way. Well, it must be all worse than ours if we're naught. All the same. I just wondered, have we found a lot of people coming into our patch and as a result of the new legislation?
We have, and some of it is unavoidable. If someone chooses to approach us, we have a period of 56 days where we have to try and prevent their homelessness, irrespective of their connection to Waverley. Now, obviously, in those initial conversations, we'll be saying to them, well, look, if we're not able to prevent your homelessness and your connection is with Guildford or Blackpool or wherever it is, we will be referring you back to that authority. So it will probably make sense for you to go back to that authority now and get the help that you might be eligible for more help there than you are here. But if someone digs their heels in, we have to try and prevent their homelessness. So it is just part of the usual part of our work now to have to deal with that, and it is an even playing field that every council has that, but whether we're victims of people thinking, well, let's go to Waverley because it's nicer, potentially that is the case, but the good news, certainly so far, is we've been able to still manage it without it impacting on our temporary accommodation figures. So, and certainly, the Surrey authorities, their temporary accommodations figures are still high as well. So that's the thing. I think the purpose behind the Homeless Reduction Act was to try and reduce temporary accommodation numbers, but it's when we did previous committee reports, in the sense the fundamentals of the housing market are still very difficult for people, with high private rents, with the caps, the benefit cap on, it is very difficult for people. So even with the new legislation, it's still very difficult for people, and a lot of people you know, are still being made homeless, and we just have to try and help them as best we can. So,
Well, clearly our strategy is working.
yeah,
It's brilliant.
yeah.
So I think I heard it there, a suggestion that we record in the minutes that the committee congratulates the homelessness prevention team. You want to have that?
Agree.
Thank you.
I just got one query relating to the papers, and that's you're going to be hosting this homelessness forum in October. Are members of this committee in a position where they could attend?
Yes.
Should they wish to?
The only thing I possibly have to is I don't know. We've invited probably 80 people, and it's in the council chamber. Last year we had about 40-45 attend, so it's just in terms of the capacity of the council chamber. Obviously we've invited our portfolio holder to attend. I'm sure it should be possible.
Yes.
If people are interested, give us your names and we can try and accommodate that. It's on the morning of the Tuesday, the 8th of October.
I would encourage it, Chairman.
Yeah.
If possible.
So it's going to give a much broader insight.
Yes, it will. Yeah, and it's attended by, I say, supported housing providers. They'll be present. I say there'll be a government presentation, which will be very interesting as well. Which we're really pleased that Rebecca Ireland will be coming to give us a government, a national oversight on homelessness. It'll be really good.
I would like to ask a question, but I'm not quite sure it's really appropriate, so please forgive me if it's not. But living in Godalming, I'm very aware of a lady who's sleeping out, you know, in the centre of the town. And I've only really spoken to her once or twice, so I don't know her circumstances. But I'm assuming from what you're saying, maybe that's her choice. And is that...
I can't talk on specific. I do know. I do know what you mean. But in general terms, we can offer what the options are, and some people's the options are very limited, and we can't dress them up. That going to a homeless hostel in Woking initially is maybe not a great option for people, but it is a stepping stone for us then to work with people, help them into a private rent and things like that. So, we can offer people options, but they can choose for different reasons not to accept them. Similarly, we have a duty under the severe weather provisions to offer emergency accommodation if it's really cold and wintry, and sometimes we can offer people emergency bed and breakfast, but if it's not in Waverley they don't want it, and so we might be accessing emergency accommodation outside of Waverley. So we're offering a roof over someone's head, but not everyone actually chooses to take it. So it is difficult. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for that. Thank you, Michael. We have one recommendation. The Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee is asked to note Council's progress in implementing its homelessness strategy action plan and agree any comments it wishes to pass to the executive. So I'm not sure we got as far as wanting to pass anything to the executive, but we've captured a commendation, and I think that represents our discussion. So everyone comfortable with that recommendation?
Brilliant.
Thank you. Good. Right, next item is the Budget Strategy Working Group. Vice Chairman is our nominee on that group, and he's going to give us a quick update.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, the membership of the committee was appointed after the previous round of the ONS committees, and since then we've met 5 times. We have a number of work items that we're progressing. Perhaps one of the important ones, the most important one, is looking at the detailed information figures behind the medium-term financial plan to see where the significant items are. That forms the basic data. We've had meetings with heads of service. That's been taking place September through to October. Had 4 meetings so far with them, another 3 still to go. That is for us to understand the opportunities for change and service delivery and efficiencies. And then alongside that, work stream 2 that we take is looking at the how the public priorities should be met and what the public are looking to us to achieve. And we are doing that with giving them list of items where they can list where they think savings could be made as a percentage basis, and that is now ongoing. We are looking at the detail of those questionnaires, but that is still to be undertaken. So that's where we are at the moment. Any questions?
Chairman, I would just add that we're not looking at the housing revenue account at the moment in there. It is just the general fund, but there are housing elements, of course, in the general fund budget that we're looking at.
Right. And we'll keep up to date on that to each of the subsequent meetings. Right, there's no recommendation there, that was just an update, so thank you for that. Final item that we're aware of the committee work programme. So Yasmin, you
Yes.
on this one, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So the committee work programme begins on page 145. Section A starts at 146, and you can see there effectively the agenda for this meeting. Quarterly items, standing items, and then the September items. November agenda starts on page 146 as well, and we've got 2 items agreed previously for that meeting. So that was the progress of recommendations from the Council Housing and Pride or Prejudice piece of work that you may have hopefully seen the report from. This piece of work that the previous committee did along with the tenants panel and representatives, looking at the stigma surrounding council housing and what we can do to help that. So that's the action plan, and the progress made against the action plan are due to come to this committee in November. Then we've got a status report on the implementation of the housing maintenance contracts. So Annalisa in the performance section did discuss that briefly about how the new contracts, the mobilisation phase is taking place. So that's an item really to sort of understand, so how many more than 6 months on, I suppose, roughly, how those contracts are being implemented, any hiccups, any teething problems, and what the committee can do, where the focus should be looking forward. We did discuss previously about having somebody from, I think it was specialist housing needs service from the borough. I think it was Transform.
Yes, Chairman. I have invited Transform and into their operations director, and she said that she was going to get back to me on the best person who could come and address the committee. I wanted her to come, so I'll give her another nudge. She's my wife's boss. Give her another nudge. So hopefully I'll be able to confirm that for November, because I think in terms of housing and mental health and a number of issues, hearing from a specialist provider is good for the committee to get their teeth into that. But I still need to bottom that out. I'm kind of chase.
So that was something the committee member there was particularly interested in last time in June. So those are the items we've got for November, and then so that's 2 recurring items: the housing development update, the performance report, and then those 3 we've just discussed. And then, as you said, Chairman, just now, the budgetary issue working group. That's obviously a short verbal one, but that's what we've got on the work programme for November. This work programme belongs to the committee, so if there's anything the committee wanted to raise and add to it, it could be for November, it could be looking longer term as well, then I'd be happy to do that, and we can discuss what that item would hope to achieve. That's section A. Once we get into more in-depth scrutiny, taking to creation of working groups and things like that, section B on page 148 will be populated. Section C is a tracker of the recommendations made by this committee, so those will be greyed out as they are achieved. You'll see recommendations from this meeting being added to that, and then so that's just so you can keep an eye on where your work is going, what effect it's having. So that's section C on page 149. I'm happy to add anything, take any questions, but add anything that the committee wants to discuss in future meetings.
Is there anything, I guess firstly, is there anything that anyone wants to get on to the next meeting agenda?
Chairman, it's not specifically for the next meeting agenda, and I think it is a good idea for us to, for you to have a little bit of slack in the agenda, because the new administration might want to bring something forward, a small item urgently that can be looked at. So I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to fill the evening up. But the most important thing, I think, to a lot of people, in terms of our own tenants, is antisocial behaviour. And I do think that's something which should be not on the agenda permanently, but I think it's something where certainly all councils, it's a very difficult issue to address because of the evidence you require, and you know, whether this council would move towards a fairly strict, I hesitate to sort of approach that New York took with their, you know, to crime. Well, it's zero tolerance, I think they call it. But certainly it is something which is very difficult for a lot of tenants, and something which seems to worsen over time. And it's a very difficult thing for our officers to take, because again it's something which takes an awful lot of time, and you can end up with nothing. You know, you're talking about tenancy agreements and what the courts will and won't do, and it can be real tough to get anything. But it is a top concern, I know, for people, and I think we ought to be bringing it back and looking at it again, perhaps with fresh eyes, with the new administration or the new councillors.
Could I just ask, is there anyone here this evening who represents Funkham area? Because I'm not aware that there is. Because you're central.
Yes,
Oxford,
I'm
aren't you?
a Godalming Town Council, and it's a perennial.
I know it's
question.
a real problem, but I do believe there are some discussions going on
There
through
are.
Godalming Town Council.
There are indeed.
For the Funkham area about this particular business. I mean, it just goes on, I know.
We've got the Borough Commander coming to Godalming Town Council on Thursday
Yes.
to talk to us, and we've got meetings with him. Got a number of meetings this week on the very topic.
Yeah.
So I think it's not something we're ignoring, it's something that's going to be being brought forward.
I think Councillor Hyman's point is well made, and it dovetails with the Community and Wellbeing ONS group,
Yeah.
which Councillor Osman is also involved in with her community safety hat on, as am I, with my community safety hat. We're doing a lot of work. We had the meeting of the Safer Waverley Partnership this afternoon, and it's interesting that when we had the last joint action group, which is where we look at locality-based issues, like Farncombe, where there's a particular area that is causing considerable difficulty, the Borough Commander did say at that point that the biggest issue at the moment is youth ASB. So I think there's a tie-up between what the Community Wellbeing ONS will do and what we might do in terms of our own sort of tenancy management. I chair the Community Harm and Risk Management meeting, so that's the sister of the JAG. That deals with individuals who come to a multi-agency meeting, and we have the gathered wisdom to try to find the best solution for the victims, the perpetrator, and a number of our tenants are involved either as victims or perpetrators, and the tenants and estate officers come to that meeting. So there is a lot of work going on, and would feed into both of the scrutiny committees. So I think, Chairman, it might be an idea that next committee I bring a short update on where we are with that in terms of the community safety work that links with the housing officers and the work that Councillor Osman and I are doing with the Safer Waverley Partnership.
Okay. It seems entirely appropriate to me. Is everyone in agreement?
Agreed.
Yeah, excellent. Good. The other thing I should have said at the start of this is that since we have a portfolio holder here, I'd be very happy for you to, I'd be happy, colleagues might want to confirm that, but if you want to chip in during the course of this about things that are coming up that might not be on our radar screen that you think would be useful for us to scrutinise, we'd welcome that. There's one item I want to, sorry, I'll come in a moment. There's one item I think is really important following last week, in that we've now got to start the carbon neutral project moving, and it's maybe premature to say exactly what this committee can contribute, because we don't know what the overall view on how it's going to be dealt with, but housing is going to have a major contribution the aspiration to get to a carbon neutral situation by 2030. So can we have a placeholder in here that I guess it's probably got to be January meeting, is it? Because it's a 6 month, in 6 months' time, the report has to go back, and whatever's going to happen in terms of housing, it would be nice for us to have had the opportunity to scrutinise it, to be sure that there are options in there, that the things that have to be done are ranked, so that, the low-hanging fruit that's cheapest is put in the correct position, and that the really hard stuff is clearly understood. So if colleagues are in agreement, I'd very much like to see something in there which we need to firm up when we have a clearer picture of the big working group that's going to work on it.
So obviously the committee controls its work programme. I just want to raise that January normally has service plans and budget officers and members are still working out how that's going to work this year, because we've done it different ways in previous years. But that doesn't mean that we can't have this this placeholder in January. It's just something to bear in mind. So we can put it down and then see how the conversations go in regards to service planning and budget.
I fully imagine that the service plan will have some kind of energy efficiency, climate.
That's true, and it can be expanded upon in the service plan item. Depends,
We may well have to convene a working group or have a special meeting for this, but it's premature to do it until it's clear what we're doing and what the big picture approach to it's going to be. So.
Yeah, so we need to get a balance, not too early, not too late. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything to?
Well, there's a lot I can't say at this stage, but I can say there's a lot of things we're talking about which I think are quite exciting, and will hopefully deliver more. I hate to say the phrase of affordable housing because we know what that means, but housing for people on all incomes across the borough. So that's something that I think when I had attended your first staff meeting, that was one of the things I said, and I'm still standing by it. So that's where I'm seeing it going. And obviously I'm very, very aware of the community safety aspect. I went to the Surrey Community Safety Board last week, which was, well, somebody said there was a lot of hot air that could be amounting to a climate change in its own right. But it was interesting to meet all the various people who come from all the different agencies to see where everyone fits in, because I think that half of the picture is seeing whose responsibilities lie where, so that you can harness the information and the people to get best results. And I think that's something that everybody talking at the Safer Waverley Partnership today was very, very passionate about. So it's not going to be brushed under the carpet, it's something that is going to be discussed at length. And when I can, I will be providing you further information.
Right, are we comfortable then? Teased out a couple of extra things to worry about, which is good. Everything you need to update this?
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so just one recommendation, that's we're invited to make any suggestions for additional topics that the committee may wish to add to its work programme. We've done that, and we're happy that we've done that. So that's that. There are no items to discuss in the closed session. So at 2 minutes to 2 minutes to 9.
Well done, Chairman, well done.
Not if we can help it. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks, officers.
Oh yeah. That's